I'm Manny.
I'm Noah.
This is Devan.
And this is No Such Thing, the show where we settle our dumb arguments and yours by actually doing the research. Today's argument began with a tweet. The question, do audiobooks count as reading?
I don't care what you call it. I honestly don't.
Do you actually comprehend content the same way when you're hearing it versus reading it?
I feel like I forget what I read very quickly.
And lastly, I have a confession to make to a friend.
I'm going to tell you something now, Rich.
Okay.
And this is full transparency here. What would you say if I told you?
There's no such thing. No such thing. No such thing. No such thing. No such thing.
I'll hop in here because I came across a tweet that I dropped into the DMs. And the tweet was, do audiobooks count as reading? And I just commented, no. So Manny, what do you think?
If someone tells me they read something, but they actually listened to it, I don't feel like they're defrauding me or anything like that. I haven't listened to many audiobooks, but if I did, I think I would be okay telling someone that I read the book.
If it's the end of the year and you're making a list of all the books you've read, you would put Prince Harry's book on there.
I would put Prince Harry.
Had you listened to it.
Exactly. If I had listened to it.
Okay, so Noah, you obviously believe that listening to an audiobook counts as reading.
Yeah, if, I've listened to the Prince Harry or Catcher in the Rye, that's a book I've read. I know the book.
Okay, so my goal this year was to read 24 books. I didn't read 24. I got to like 2021. You're telling me if I listened to 24 audiobooks this year, it would be the equivalent of me reading 24 books.
Yeah, I would totally accept that if you were like, if you posted...
That is insane.
If you posted your list and were like, here's the 24
Here's
books
the 24 books I read
and
then
consumed. We're talking about a semantic issue.
No. The question was, do audiobooks count as reading?
Yeah.
Reading being...
Well, I guess it means, what does reading mean to you?
Reading means to me what reading means. Like,
with your eyes?
Yeah,
with your eyes?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what is the definition of reading?
I think it's a very small view of of what reading really is.
I think it's a very, reading is one thing, which is reading.
All right, but these are books.
Huh? They're all
books.
Audiobooks.
Yeah, but it's the same...
It's the same content.
Well, you think people are obscuring the fact that they listen to books?
Yes, this is the real reason I have a real issue with this is because I think people just need to be honest about how they're consuming media. And I think the people who listen to audiobooks and want to pretend that they read the books is because they are slightly embarrassed that they listened to the book and they didn't read it. Because otherwise, why wouldn't you just say, yeah, I listened to that audiobook? This person was clearly asking because she was putting together some sort of list, end of the year. She didn't read as many books as maybe she felt like she should have that year. But she listened to some audiobooks and she wanted to add them to the list.
So you want people to make two lists then?
Yeah. Well, like if I put together a list
to be honest, it's like I'm not that interested in seeing any lists. So now it's like you're going to ask me to look at two
I'm not
for
saying,
separate mediums where it's like...
I'm not saying that, right? Look, you can make one list and say, here's the things I read and listened to this year.
So I think a question for Devan here is, what is it about the act of reading that you feel is more valuable than listening to an audiobook?
What is the difference between reading and like listening to an audiobook is that like I can't read and walk my dog at the same time, right? I can't read.
Yeah, but would you if you could? I mean,
if I could, I would.
So who cares then? I mean, or like very agile.
But it's like, we talked about this the other day. People don't read books. Reading is not an easy thing to do. Like making time for reading, especially now having the attention span to read. And I think, rightfully or wrongfully, people look at people who read a lot of books in a different light than someone who may read one book a year, right? Like saying I read 100 books this year is very different than I listened to 100 audiobooks. Every morning I listen to, let's say, 2 hours of like between like NPR and WNYC and like the Daily, right? So if I said, okay, I'm not going to do that every day, I'm just going to make those audiobooks. I can get through a lot of audiobooks in a year.
So basically this is like a work ethic thing.
I mean, you're looking at it as a time management. I mean, I do listen to the occasional audiobook.
Okay.
I mostly read books.
Yeah.
In your definition. Physical paperback books, I'm looking with my eyes.
It now feels like such a brave thing to say. Like, I do listen occasionally.
I keep a list just so I can look at what I've read this year.
Okay, and on that list...
And I can look at that list and I don't mark off the difference.
You know which ones you read.
Yeah.
And you know which ones you listen to.
So Devan is making a point about like transparency and honesty, but another question around this is like whether you're reading or listening, do you feel like the information is being retained in the same way? For example, if Noah listened to Killers of the Flower Moon and Devan read it, do you feel like you're coming away with such a different experience?
So I don't think like because I like read a book and Noah listened to a book, that means that I necessarily have like retained the information better. I just think it's like probably processed in a way that's different. But I also like there's books that I read that I don't remember very well. Like I sent y'all that TikTok the other day about that woman talking about like reading a book and then like instantly forgetting.
Am I the only person who read a book, love the book, in about 72 hours you done forgot everything that happened in that damn book? And that's why my friends be thinking that I just be skimming through the pages. Because they fuck around and ask me about a book. I couldn't tell you what the fuck happened in that book.
And I feel like there's some stuff that I read just like for fun that I'm not paying that close attention to. Like that happens and I instantly forget what happened. And there's like some audio stuff that like I'll be listening to that like maybe I'm paying a bit more attention to, like a This American Life episode where I'll be able to retain more information. So I don't know. I think that's a long way of saying I think it depends. I don't think like necessarily reading or listening to something means you're going to retain the information better.
It can go both ways. Like I've read books and then reread them and then just, whether it's just the mood you're in when you're doing it or whatever, you might just be able to absorb the information better, whether it's just like you're in a different headspace.
That's
and
true.
then there's also books that like I've done both at the same time where like I'll have the physical copy, but then I'll have the audiobook on my phone.
Some of it.
You're reading
So
along.
like I remember doing that with the Oppenheimer biography.
Oh, wow. We had a conversation with Rich about it.
For context, Rich is a friend of ours we used to work with.
I just want to reveal on the podcast here that you didn't say I also listened to the audiobook during that conversation.
Yeah, that's me. Well, I'm speaking my truth. That's because that's how I feel. It's the same thing.
The conversation was literally about how he couldn't get through reading the book.
Yeah, but I don't know what his habits are. Like maybe he reads 2 books a year. I read a lot of books.
I be reading. That exact conversation is my issue with people who want to claim that they read audiobooks. It's like one man is saying, wow, it's really hard for me to get through reading this book. And you're like, yeah, it was kind of easy for me. I did it in like 3 weeks.
Well, I didn't brag about it.
And then you're like listening to the audiobook.
He asked me how long it took. I gave him an answer of a time.
without some very important information, which is you listened to half of it.
Yeah, well, I know every fact in there. So
I'm not saying, once again, it's not about comprehension.
to me, it is about comprehension. We keep going back to this where it's like you're talking about people being worried about how they're going to be perceived
Yes.
for it, right? That's kind of what this is actually about.
Yeah, this is about people's perception.
So it just depends on how you want to present publicly, I guess. I don't think in that moment with Rich, for example, I wasn't being self-conscious. I just wasn't thinking about it. I was beyond being self-conscious. I was on a different plane. It was not even a thought in my head to mention it because it's irrelevant to me.
Just to distill the argument a little bit here, basically, Devan, you feel like people are self-conscious about this because they feel like listening to an audiobook is not as prestigious as reading a book.
You got to see what's like important to you. Like it's like a challenge for me to like find time to read. To me, there's something, I don't know, still sacred about getting outside of the sort of digital world we live in to read words on a page. Well, like, you didn't ask Noah how he feels about it.
About,
do you think reading is more sacred than listening to an audiobook?
I can't say necessarily. I think that, like, I think if you're actually focusing on the words and focusing on listening to it, you could still have the same experience or a very similar experience, if not the same one. But as far as comprehending and connecting with it, I think generally you could. Even something that is like maybe on a more sentence by sentence level, kind of that more literary sort of thing.
And to play Noah's advocate a little bit,
Please.
like the passing of information via word of mouth, like that's long before books and writing. Like that's an ancient tradition.
That's right. Ever heard of the Odyssey, Devan?
Well, what do you personally think, though? You still don't really answer the question.
Me
You
generally,
personally,
I'm
at the end of the year, if you read 10 books versus listening to 10 audiobooks, what do you think is more valuable?
Reading.
Okay.
reading with eyes.
We can and look, I think the thing here, right, is that we all want to pretend like audiobooks are just as good as reading.
I mean, again, it's like what we say is valuable. That's what I would prefer. And that's how I would get the most out of these books for me.
Mm-hmm. But I think this is that classic sort of like everyone wants, like we all want to pretend to be like inclusive and blah, blah, blah.
That's what I'm doing.
But it comes down to it. It's like, well, me personally, I prefer to read. But like, if you want to say like audiobooks is reading, good for you.
You're saying I'm being too woke.
Yeah, I think that basically.
I just think it's like people absorb these things differently.
Agree.
Yeah.
So just own the way you're absorbing it. Like if you're listening to an audiobook, just be upfront about it.
So Devan's main concern is more about the presentation of it all. He thinks people are embarrassed to admit that they listen to books because it's quote unquote easier than reading. So we're going to do a couple things now. We're going to do a test to see how reading stacks up versus listening as far as retaining information. And I'm going to try to talk to an expert about all of this stuff. All right, we're back. I'm Noah.
Manny.
Devan.
Last time we spoke, we were arguing about whether or not audiobooks count as reading.
Should we just really quickly say where we stand?
Devin, why don't you say where you stand?
Audiobooks do not count as reading. They count as listening to audiobooks.
And to me, they're the same. You get all the same stuff out of them. So it's reading to me.
Dan, I don't remember. Where did you stand on this, man?
I remember being kind of agnostic, I think.
So what we've done since then is I wanted to get some real answers on this. I reached out to an expert on the issue. I wanted to find out how reading comprehension is actually studied and what differences there are between reading and listening.
My name is Virginia Clinton-Lisell. I'm an associate professor of educational foundations and research at the University of North Dakota, and I specialize in digital reading and flexible reading modalities.
She published a meta-analysis a few years ago looking at 46 different reading versus listening studies with over 4,600 participants. So she's kind of the perfect person to ask about this. She had an interesting motivation for why she started this study to begin with.
I will say my motivation for this study was I was in a book club on campus, and somebody very sheepishly said, I've been listening to the audiobook. Oh, I'm sorry. And she said, I've been doing so much driving, it just worked better. And I remember just thinking, why are you so embarrassed about that? We're all busy academics. We're doing something extra. You're meeting and talking about it and contributing.
I've learned something after that soundbite. I'm on. If you're in a book club,
a visceral reaction to that.
I'm like, okay, I don't care what you call it. I honestly don't. You're in a book club,
The
and
whole
then you listen
point
to it.
of a book club.
Yeah, but if she's able to come and actually say things,
Yeah,
I mean, it's like,
get
what
it.
difference does it
I
make
get
there?
the information relaying, but that feels like a book club feels like kind of a sacred act.
Yeah, but I guess the point is, if she hadn't said that, would the other people in the group even know?
They
And
wouldn't know.
What are you in the book club for? Because you all read these pages, or because you're reading this book together and learning about the story or whatever? It's if you're able to talk about it, then it doesn't.
I view this
matter.
twofold, right? Like a book club holds you accountable for, okay, I'm going to have to finish this thing because I'm going to have to go and talk to people about it.
Exactly.
So it forces you to make time to read the book. To your point, I think in terms of the discussions, sure. I don't care if you've, I can talk to someone about a book if I've read it and they've listened to it. I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm sorry. I only speak to people who have read the book.
You're not like
The book club it doesn't go any differently if you listen or read it, but it just feels like a weird, for whatever reason that struck me as like, wow, in a book club?
Yeah.
I asked her what these experiments typically look like, and it's pretty simple. The participants will read or listen to a selected text. Sometimes there will be different parameters, like you have 30 minutes to do it, or it'll kind of shift you through one phrase at a time to keep you at a certain pace. Mm-hmm. And then you'll answer multiple choice questions or do something like write down everything you remember. So there's a variance there as far as how difficult the testing is, whether it's looking for simple stuff or kind of taking the next step and inferring and applying more knowledge to it. It'd typically be something where one group reads something one week and then they come back the next week and listen to something. So you can compare the same people's scores in each modality. Anyway, we did our own small version of that.
Yeah, we did.
Now, obviously, a real study wouldn't just be me
listening versus Devan reading, it would be us doing both of them.
Right.
And then testing. But this is more to prove a point and to be petty. So we just did a simple one like this. We both read a short story called The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. And then we took a short, I think it's definitely like for a high school class.
Okay.
A dumb high school class.
Okay.
Multiple choice questionnaire on it.
So I think we should start with Devan's score.
Okay.
Yeah. So Devan read
Let me pull up.
the story using a visual modality.
So I got one wrong.
Wow. That's pretty good.
Okay, so what my score
Yeah.
was,
18
I got
out
one
of
wrong,
19.
one
Yeah.
wrong, so I got a 95%.
That's great.
Wow.
Star City.
That's strong. A strong start. Noah, how did you do on your test?
Well, I read the book using a, auditory modality. And I got an 89%. I got 2 questions wrong.
Damn.
Okay, only
Yeah.
two.
Only 2.
So as kind of the arbiter here, I think it does mean something that Devan got 1 more question right than Noah. However, I'm thinking like 1 question to me, I don't know if I can attribute that to like reading being that much better of a method of information retention.
He might just be smarter.
That's true.
Devin might just be built different.
We have not thought about that.
This specific test. I don't know if the results like stats wise Devin wins, but I just don't know if I can really say which mode is retaining the information better than the other one.
So I asked Dr. Clinton-Lisell to explain what's going on in your brain when you're reading.
There's 2 processes that are going on in our brain in what's called the simple view of reading. There's decoding, where you look at the text and you're able to determine what those words are. So you can see the word, the, THE, the letters, and then you know that means the. And then there's the comprehension aspect, where you're taking the meaning from the text and creating an idea of what the whole text is about. That's called a mental representation of the text. And that requires things like vocabulary and background knowledge and making connections from one idea to the next.
So that kind of lays out the 2-step process that goes on when you're taking in a text. I asked, the big question, which is, what's the difference comprehension-wise between reading versus listening?
They're honestly not that different. Obviously, the decoding process isn't there. You're not having to look at words and figure out what those letters mean. But instead, you're listening and you have to figure out those sounds make words. Now, because we learn how to listen from infancy, but we learn how to read a little bit later in our lives, we forget that listening process actually takes brain power and actually takes effort. So I think that's why a lot of times there's this misconception that listening to an audiobook is cheating, or it's not really reading a book or learning about a content area. And that just doesn't seem to be the case. Definitely when it comes to memory for what you read, there's really no difference between an audiobook and a visual book.
So you heard it there, reading and listening are actually very similar,
Yeah.
but listening is so much more natural to us since we've been doing it longer than we've been reading, obviously. Now we kind of overlook the work that we do to turn sounds we hear into words with meaning.
That's fair.
Which I thought was really interesting.
And I suppose that's the other side of the exam that you two did, which is like, yes, Devin got 1 more question correct, but Noah still got 17 out of 19.
Yeah.
So it's not like listening to audio.
Yeah, if I came in and got 10 of those right out of 19,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here sitting talking to you guys. I'd be like, we're scrapping this episode.
Too shameful.
One thing she does mention is like, when we're talking about more complicated sorts of things, they do see more improvement for visual reading. Part of it is like you're more likely to go back and reread things, even if you don't think about it. So like on a page, you probably reread a few sentences, even if you don't feel like, oh, actually, I'm going back.
Or even pausing,
Yeah.
right? Like that's what I was thinking
Yeah.
about when I was doing this test. It's like I was stopping and like, okay, and saying to myself, okay, got to remember that character's
Yeah.
name because it probably will come up in a quiz, and then reading again. Whereas if you're listening to an audiobook, you can pause and rewind, but it's like, it's a lot more complicated of a process.
She also said, to where we're talking about driving and this sort of thing, there's obviously different levels of distraction. So it's like you can be distracted reading
a paper book, if like your kid's running up to you and bugging you all the time or whatever, your phone's next to you and going off. The same way where if you're driving and you've going down a new route that you don't know and you have a book on, you're probably not going to get a lot of it. But if you're doing your normal commute and it's like
Your
streets
brain
are clear and
shut
you know
off.
what it is, your brain is not even thinking about it. At that point, it's probably about equal.
Oh, okay.
So multitasking in general lowers comprehension and just takes longer to pick up that stuff. She also mentioned some other reasons that audiobooks could be a preferred option.
I know also there's a lot of functional diversity. So obviously, if you're visually impaired, your audiobooks are going to be a better option for the most part. But there's a lot of other functionally diverse individuals, things like having bad arthritis, holding a book is painful. Listening to a book is not. There's a bell curve of how active and how much somebody moves in general. And, people like my daughter don't have ADHD, but they are just more active individuals. So people with ADHD who really do have a hard time sitting still find that if they're doing some kind of multitasking that doesn't take cognitive effort, like folding the laundry or washing the dishes, that having that physical movement keeps their body calm so they're able to listen and really enjoy the book. Whereas holding a book, there's some things you can do, like you can ride a stationary bike or do a stair stepper, but you're a lot more limited as far as your mobility.
She ended up bringing up about schools and reading loss where, I'm asking about all these different things. And she's like, yeah, well, like, especially when you're talking with students, like, well, ultimately you just want them to read however they're going to actually read it, because that's going to be better than if they just totally skip the assignment because it's only in a textbook. And she basically says, unless the lesson is about to teach a reading skill or something, like that's the point of it, then ideally the student just has whatever option they're actually going to do.
Is the learning objective teaching them something specific to reading? Or is it about the content or the story structure or the plot or the background knowledge? If it's the learning objectives don't have anything to do with the actual modality specific language skills, then if an option is available, giving that option would probably be a good idea.
That's kind of her view as a educator. The more you read, the better you read. And that just goes for everything.
And she says the more you read in terms of like actual reading or your pretend reading?
Reading.
The more you read, the better you read.
The good doctor said
maybe the more you listen, the better you listen.
Yeah.
Good doctor.
So those are my main takeaways. So, I guess the big question is, does this change your opinions on this at all? Manny, why don't you go first?
As we know, at the beginning of this, I was kind of ambivalent. I've never minded when someone... I guess I've never known, actually. So someone could have told me that they read a book and they could have lied to my face.
Yeah, probably lied.
But if they were lying, I don't think I would have minded. Now I do care, but I'm still in the middle because I truly don't mind how people describe how they read things. So I guess that puts me on Noah's side.
Are you surprised by
Yes.
what we found out, I guess?
I was surprised to hear that listening to a book is essentially the same comprehension process as reading a book. And so if someone's listening to a book and they say they read it, if they want to say they read it, I don't have any problem with it.
Yeah, I'll say even as the audiobook advocate here, I was a bit surprised that the comprehension levels were essentially the same. I kind of expected that reading on paper would be a lot higher if there was going to be a difference. So I was surprised when I learned that there's not that much of a difference. But yeah, even as someone who would listen, for me, it felt like I definitely get more out of the page, but I'm finding out that basically if I actually focused on an audiobook, I would get pretty much exactly the same, which was instructive.
And then Devan, I imagine that you still feel like people should be upfront about whether they read or listened, but do you feel any differently about like that mode? Like, does it, do you feel differently? Do you have more respect for people who listen to books knowing that they're getting the same information?
I think, I know I came up very strong.
Here we go. He's walking it back.
Because I still feel very strongly that people who listen to audiobooks should just say they listened to the audiobooks. But for me, it was never about the comprehension part because, like I said, there's like some of the stuff that I consume, I feel like the best is audio-based stuff. Like that's the stuff that like keeps my attention at times the best. Like it's the mode that like I default to in terms of like entertainment, right? So it was never to me about comprehension. It is interesting to actually see like, okay, yeah, these are actually very similar. Like she said, there are, you know, obviously there's some specifics based on how distracted you are, or caveats, I should say. But so I'm not that surprised that comprehension is pretty similar, but I still feel like knowing that, you should feel even more empowered to go up to someone and said, I listened to the audiobook. What are you going to say? I didn't comprehend the information in the same way?
Well,
it's like, now
I do say that as far as if I came across someone, if say I'm having an open conversation now and it comes out
that you read an audiobook.
I listened to it. Yeah, I read an audiobook. I think now I'd be like, well, actually, first of all, listen to this podcast. But also I'd probably be like, oh, you might be surprised to learn that it's actually, the same.
Same comprehension.
As far as comprehension.
But,
so,
maybe for me, still, there is something about reading.
Mm-hmm.
The ritual of doing it.
Yeah, right.
The fact that you can't do it while doing other things. It still holds a special place in my heart. But if someone wants to come at you saying like you're an idiot because you listen to the thing, it's like, no.
Yeah, actually, I'm not. I'm an idiot for other reasons, perhaps, but not because of that.
I think the audiobook listeners of the world, after listening to this episode, will feel more empowered to be more transparent about.
They don't gotta lie about
how they consumed that book.
Yes,
and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Exactly.
How we changed the world.
Before we end the episode, I think we need to do one more thing.
I think I know what you're talking about.
I don't think this is necessary.
Yeah, I think we need to call up Rich.
All right, let's do it.
What's up, guys?
Rich, do you remember last year we got burritos?
Yeah.
And then I think we went bowling.
We did go bowling. I remember it vividly.
Do you remember what we talked about while we were walking from the burrito place to the bowling alley?
Yeah, we were talking about Oppenheimer. The movie had just come out, and I was saying like, yeah, I just got the book, and you were saying, oh yeah, I already read it. And I was like, wait, really? You had time to read all of that? And you're like, yeah, I just spent some time, like really dug down into it.
And all right, so I'm going to tell you something now, Rich.
Okay.
And this is full transparency here.
Yeah.
What would you say if I told you that, listen, I completed the book, but I listened to about 25% of it as an audiobook? What's your reaction there?
Okay, so it kind of seems like where you're going with this is that maybe Manny and Devan are trying to say that like you're a poser or something.
Yeah.
But no, I think this is like innovative.
Yes.
Well, Rich, there was a moment of the conversation you guys had last year where you mentioned how hard it was to get through some of the chapters.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Rich was very impressed by how quickly you had finished it. He's like, wow, you read that in 3 weeks?
So, actually, wait, yeah, now I'm being swayed. Yeah,
okay.
Hold on. Keep going, Devan. Keep going.
Yeah, listen to Devan.
And Noah just said, yeah. And I remember the look on his face when he said it. I turned around during this part in the conversation because Rich was like, wow, that's really fast. Like, you read it that fast? Like 3 weeks? And Noah was like,
I was impressed. Yeah.
He was like, yeah. And I looked at Noah's face and I could tell, I was like, it looked like you were lying. I was like,
wow.
Looks like something's happening in his eyes. But I'm like, that would be a weird, like, Noah's not going to lie about reading a book.
I just want to clarify my position now, too.
Yeah,
because
please.
I thought, I am feeling a little bit manipulated. I'm feeling like you were kind of playing into that idea of you are the book guy in this relationship here.
Yes, you are.
Listen, you asked a question, I answered a question. I answered,
I'm feeling a little betrayed.
Yeah, that's what I expected.
It kind of seemed like you were doing it for like nerd clout. I think the real question that you're not getting at is if you are an audiobook person, are you going to be upfront about it? If you're like,
I'll tell you this.
Oh yeah, this new book, like, yeah, like I read this, but it's like, no, you didn't. You listened to it, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I think people need to be upfront. We need to normalize being upfront about audiobooks.
Listen, in the future, in a scenario like that, Rich, where someone's prodding me for details on the speed and pace of my reading, I'm going to go, listen, do you have a second? I'm going to say, sit down.
Okay.
I'm going to explain to you exactly which pages I read, what I listened to, and how.
Good.
And,
thank you.
And I'm just going to come clean from now on. I'm not gonna, just
We need
let
more
anything brush past the shoulder.
transparency.
Say, I'm not that smart. Whatever. It's like we'll just move on.
We need honesty in this country.
By the way, since we recorded, Rich has become an avid audiobook listener.
There's no such thing. No such thing. No such thing.
No Such Thing is produced by Manny Fidel, Noah Friedman, and Devan Joseph. Theme song is by Manny. Our guests this week were Dr. Clinton-Lisell and Rich Filoni. Thanks to our friends for their notes, Julia Lindsay, Mia DeGraff, Catherine Isaac, Sarah Floyd, and Sruthi and PJ from Search Engine. Please visit nosuchthing.show to check out some audiobook recommendations from Rich. And lastly, this was our first episode, so please make sure to follow and subscribe wherever you're listening. Drop a 5-star review, and the next episode is live now. Here's a preview.
I'm pretty confident I could land a plane.
Very?
Yeah. I think somewhere between somewhat and very confident. If someone's giving me instructions, I think I could do it.
You might be able to just point slightly towards the runway with your controls and what you see.
Oh, that's the runway. I'm looking at this thing.